Sudan, on the brink of a civil war, is seeing its capital city of Khartoum quickly become a ghost town, causing citizens to fear worsening conditions as buses arrive to pick up individuals fleeing for safety.
Sudanese people are afraid that there might be unethical practices in the war against civilians and using civilians as human shields. These are our fears after the evacuation of expats.
Standing with their luggage, Sudanese citizens were taking any available ride out of Khartoum, even after a spike in the bus fees.
There's a big increase in the price of gas, which reflected on the price of the bus ticket. The bus to Egypt was for 30,000 or 35,000 Sudanese pounds, with an extra cost of the taxi on the border crossing. Now it's more than 200,000 Sudanese pounds. And every day there's a change, an increase. If you calculate the increase, it's around 700% increase.
Tens of thousands of Sudanese have fled Sudan to neighboring countries since fighting between the military and the well-armed Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group started on April 15th. At least 420 people have been killed. The conflict has also triggered a humanitarian crisis in the impoverished country, where millions of people have been left without access to basic services. On Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the United States was pressing Sudanese military leaders to extend and expand a ceasefire.
The Sudanese people are not giving up on their aspirations for a secure, free, and democratic future. Neither will we.
This all comes 4 years after long-running autocrat Omar al-Bashir was toppled. Expats from around the world have been evacuated from the country in the past few days.
All the evacuees are students from the International University of Africa, based in Khartoum, Sudan. 39 in total, as I said earlier, 19 Kenyans, and 20 from our allied states and friends.
Most of the time we were sleeping, as in lying down on the floor, just praying and keeping positive. Yeah, and I strongly had the feeling that I had to keep positive, very focused, and above all, to take any risk to get me out of that country.
Right now it's still dangerous. We are hearing from colleagues it's less intense, but for the past 8 days it was continuing.
Secretary General spoke in the Security Council about the violence in Sudan, which he said risks a catastrophic conflagration within Sudan that could engulf the whole region and beyond. He strongly condemned the indiscriminate bombardment of civilian areas, including healthcare facilities. He calls on the parties to stop combat operations in densely populated areas and to allow unhindered humanitarian aid operations. Civilians must be able to access food, water, and other essential supplies and evacuate from combat zones. The Secretary General is in constant contact with the parties to the conflict and has called on them to de-escalate tensions and to return to the negotiating table. The United Nations will continue our efforts with our partners to secure a permanent halt to the fighting as soon as possible. In a statement issued earlier in the day, the Secretary General welcomed the safe, temporary relocation of hundreds of UN staff members and dependents and associated personnel from Khartoum and other locations in Sudan. He affirmed the continued dedication of the United Nations to stand with and work for the Sudanese people in full support of their wishes for a peaceful, secure future and a return to the democratic transition. The United Nations will carry out its work with its personnel both inside and outside Sudan. About 700 UN, international, non-governmental organization staff and embassy staff and their dependents have reached Port Sudan by road. Dozens of UN internationally recruited and international NGO staff have already been evacuated from El Geneina and Zelenge to Chad, while other operations are ongoing or planned. A small number of internationally recruited personnel, including the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Volker Perth, will remain in Sudan and will continue to work towards a resolution to the current crisis and returning to the UN-mandated tasks. The UN is also taking necessary measures to protect Sudanese staff members and their families and is exploring every possible avenue to support them. The Special Representative of the Secretary General, Volker Perth, said that the presence on the ground has been adjusted in light of the security situation, but there is no plan or thinking of the UN leaving Sudan. On the humanitarian front, we're deeply concerned about the impact of the fighting. Our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that there are acute shortages of food, water, medicines, and fuel, and limited access to communications and electricity. The price of essential items as well as transport are skyrocketing. There have been additional reports of looting of humanitarian supplies and warehouses. We and our partners continue to call on the parties to respect humanitarian personnel and assets. The fighting has displaced civilians in the capital, Khartoum, as well as northern Blue Nile, North Kordofan, North Darfur, West Darfur, and South Darfur states. In areas where intense fighting has hampered our humanitarian operations, the United Nations is reducing its footprint. A humanitarian leadership team will remain in Sudan to oversee operations. We're establishing a hub in Port Sudan, where a core team of UN staff will lead humanitarian operations in the country. We and our partners continue to deliver whenever and wherever feasible. In recent days, the World Health Organization and our partners distributed fuel to one of the main hospitals in Khartoum. WHO stands ready to deploy additional emergency medical supplies, such as blood bags, trauma, and emergency health kits. A reminder that humanitarian needs in Sudan were already at record levels before this fighting erupted, with some 15.8 million people, about a third of the population, requiring humanitarian assistance.